Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Saturday live chat. If you've just joined me, wherever you are, welcome. I'm happy that you're able to tune in from anywhere you are at the moment. So if you are live here with me, can you type very quickly where exactly you're tuning in from? Maybe the country or the city that you are listening to this live video session from. Okay, so this is going to be a very short session today because we're just going to be dealing with the questions that you have related to the IELTS test. And this is specifically for the IELTS candidates who are already with me in the IELTS tutor support group. So this is a very small community where we get together and not just receive information but also share and exchange information with other IELTS candidates who would benefit from any ideas, feedback, tips or suggestions that not just only IELTS teachers or examiners may have, but from other IELTS candidates as well. So it's a giving and sharing community, giving and receiving sort of community where everybody has a role to play in contributing to the, to how successful this group is. Okay, so thank you very much to those who have written in with their questions, and we're just going to deal with them one by one. And if you do have any other questions, please type in your question below this video in the comments section so we can deal with them as we go along. But otherwise, we'll just talk about the various questions that you have already posted for me in this group. Okay, so we'll start off with the first question here, asked by Mohammed. Let me see if I can paste the question right here. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay. So the question is, are face-to-face books good to study to be able to succeed in the IELTS test? Now, I'm not really sure what face-to-face books are because I don't think I've ever actually used it in my own classroom or on my online lessons. But I gather from what I can assume or from what I've seen when I did a very quick Google search on it, is that it's a general English course book. I hope I'm right there. So if it's a general English course book, I think it would be good for you to use them with a teacher, because most of these general English course books are meant to be used in class with a group of other students where you can interact and exchange feedback on your writing or speaking skills as well as your listening and reading. I'm not really sure if it has any IELTS components in there, but I very much doubt it because from what I've seen from the face-to-face book series, it's mostly focused on general English. I would say yes and no. Face-to-face books are good if you want to succeed in the IELTS in the long run, not over a short-term period. With improving your vocabulary, your grammar skills, your communication skills with other students, I think this would be a good resource to use with a teacher. I don't think these books are meant for self-study. So you might end up feeling quite lost and, you know, not knowing which direction to go to when you use these books on your own. Um, but if you want to um, improve your general English skills, I think this would be a good resource, um, and it will definitely benefit you in the long term period, in terms of your ability to use the English that you've learned from these course books, and apply them onto your own speaking, writing, listening, and reading skills. Okay, so I hope that has answered your question. Yes and no. Yes, in the long run, but no in the short term period. So if you're in a bit of a hurry to try to improve your English in the short term period, I would suggest that you, um, I think, work with your English, work at your English with a teacher who's able to guide you, in a shorter time period. Okay, because I think you need all the feedback you can get with your writing and speaking ability. Okay, so that's the first question. I think the second question I've got here is from Sarah, who has got a question about IELTS speaking. Okay, so let me see if I can post or paste this question here. Okay, so here is the question. In speaking, is it important to add idioms in speaking to get 7 plus, or can I get it without using them? Okay, again, this is a yes and no sort of answer. I'm quite sure that a lot of teachers have been telling candidates to use idioms in if they want to do well in IELTS speaking. Now, there are um, pros and cons to doing this. Okay, let's talk about the pros first, or let's talk about the one benefit in using idioms. When you are assessed in IELTS speaking, examiners want to see a skillful manipulation of language, and this includes using idioms when you talk. And if candidates are able to use this quite skillfully without being obvious, or without sounding forced, then that would give you a minimum of band 7. Now, however, I have, in my experience as an examiner, awarded band 9, and I'm sure my IELTS examiner colleagues have done the same as well, to candidates who are very, very smooth or very fluent in answering IELTS interview questions without using idioms. So you can get away without using idioms because idioms is not the main focus of what IELTS examiners are looking for. Don't forget that there are 3 other criteria that we will be assessing you on, or IELTS examiners will be assessing you on, which are fluency, grammar, as well as pronunciation. Idioms constitute only part of the 25% of your overall assessment, and that falls under vocabulary. So if you want to use idioms, yes, go ahead and practice using idioms to prepare yourself for the test. But I would advise you against using idioms too frequently because it may come across as being quite forced. Um, Examiners are trained to see how naturally these English idioms are being used in the IELTS interview. Okay, so if you come across, or if the IELTS examiner is under the impression that you're using these idioms just to pass the test, then instead of working in your favor, this will probably not make a difference in your marks. So if you are already speaking at a band 6, for example, throwing in idioms in every sentence will not get you a band 7, because your examiner will know that you're just forcing yourself to use idioms just to pass the test, and they can easily go through see through this. If you want to use idioms, I would suggest that you use maybe 3 or 4 expressions throughout the whole interview. So maybe one idiomatic expression in part 1, another one in part 3, another one in part 2. So in that case, it if it comes across as sounding more natural and less forced, and your examiner may see that you're able to use these quite well, and if used correctly in context, in the context of what you're talking about, then you may stand to benefit from these expressions. Okay, so yes and no. It is important for you to add idioms in your speaking um, to get a band 7, because for an examiner to award you a band 7, they would like to hear a few sophisticated idiomatic expressions out there being used naturally and skillfully. No, in the sense that if you're forcing yourself to use these idioms, then you will not get a band 7. So my recommendation is to practice speaking as much as you can and getting feedback about your speaking. Or even if you don't have someone to provide you with feedback, then perhaps you could try recording your voice and see um, how often you're using these idiomatic expressions when you speak, or how forced it sounds to your examiner. Okay, so yes and no. All right, so moving on to Sarah's next question. Again, I think this is related to IELTS speaking. Um, let's see if I can, again, paste them on the board here. Okay, I hope you can see this now. Sometimes in speaking, they ask us about the future, and I don't have any idea what will happen. How can I answer a question like this? Okay. Yes. I think this is a recurring topic that comes up during the interview, where your examiner will ask you to predict something, um, usually in part 3, sometimes in part 2, maybe. I think in part 2 you might come across a question like, describe your ideal future job, or describe a place that you would like to live in the future, or maybe a question in part 3 that might ask you something a little bit more abstract or general. Okay, just a second. Sorry. Where was I? Yes, a question in part three may sound something like, what do you think will be um, people's eating habits in 10 years, for example? Do you think people will smoke less in 10 years? Something like that. Um, so obviously, you don't know what will happen in the future. But this is not what the examiner is testing you on, because content has got nothing to do with your with how well you perform in the test, because you're not being tested on content. You're being tested on how you answer the question. So obviously, a question that requires you to predict something is for the examiner to see whether or not you're able to use future tenses to talk about the future. So in a situation like this, even if you don't know what's going to happen, maybe it would be to your benefit to start off with something like, well, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure what people's eating habits will be like in my country in 50 years from now, whether they'll be eating more unhealthy food or whether we will become vegetarians in the future. I have absolutely no idea. But looking at our diets at the moment, I feel that we are leading our younger generation towards very unhealthy, a very unhealthy lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. So, talk about what you think will happen. They may or may not come true. I mean, that's irrelevant. The examiner doesn't care about that. They want to hear you talk. That's their primary aim. So you need to talk as much as possible. Be honest if you really don't know what's going to happen, but the worst thing you could do is be quiet about it. That's a guarantee that you will lose marks if you speak less, compared to someone who doesn't know anything about the future but talks about what he guesses or what she guesses the future will turn out to be. um, you can I don't know, you can lie about certain things. I mean, lying is not cheating or a crime in the IELTS test. So, for example, in speaking part two, you may be asked to describe your where you're going to live in 10 years from now. So, if you're honest, you can say something like, well, actually, I feel that I'm still going to be living where I am now because this is the place where I grew up, blah, blah, blah. Or you could lie about it and say something like, well, I've always wanted to live in Japan because it's a place that I've heard about from a lot of my friends, blah, blah, blah. So nobody can tell the difference whether you're lying or whether you're telling the truth. But the point is to keep going about it, to keep talking about it as though um, it's something true. Yeah. But of course, when you lie, you have to lie within reason. You can't say something like, well, I'm going to move to Japan in about 5 years from now because I've received $10 million from my grand aunt who has just died, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it may be true, but it sounds a little bit more believable if you say that I'm going to move to Japan in 10 years because I'm hoping to get a job in a multinational corporation, something like that. So use your due diligence, use your judgment, use your logic. Think, what you think comes across as logical. But the most important thing for you to do is to just keep talking and try to use various tenses. When you talk about the future, don't just stick to one tense like I will, going to. There are more expressions related to talking about the future. You could use the present tense for the future. For example, um, the train, when you talk about schedules, for example, the train leaves at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So I'm going to have to get ready before then, or something like that. Or you can use um, other expressions like I'm about to take an IELTS test to determine what my future will be, blah, blah, blah. So there are different tenses or different expressions to use when referring to the future. You can also use the present continuous to talk about the future. For example, something like I'm hoping to study law at university, or um, my sister is thinking of studying law at university, or something like that. So vary the use of your tenses, vary the expressions that you use. Don't keep sticking to the same tense over and over again, because otherwise you'll be penalized for repetition and the lack of variety in your expressions when you answer questions in the interview. Okay, so I hope that has answered your questions. I don't think there are any more questions at the moment. So far, I've had 3 put forward for this session today. But if you do have more, you can set it aside for our live session next Saturday, where we can discuss further questions that you may have about the IELTS test. Okay? So basically that's it. Thank you very much for joining me live on today's Saturday live chat session. Yeah, so keep working hard, and try to keep up with the daily prompts that we have here in the support group, because basically this is for your own benefit. You need to discipline yourself, organize yourself, set aside some time for you to prepare well for the IELTS. This sets you apart from being a successful student to, to a student who doesn't really bother to do anything about preparing themselves for the test. Okay, so have a lovely weekend, and I look forward to seeing more of your contributions in the next week. Okay, and for those of you who have not been contributing, it's been nice knowing you, and I wish you all the best for your test. Okay, take care. Have a good Sunday. Bye for now.